Well, I'm really delighted that the Unitarian Universalist denomination has chosen ethical eating as its study action issue for like 5 years. They're supposed to be all around the country looking at ethical eating, kind of dragging their feet at it a little bit. We've been traveling around. Now that I live in a RV, a fifth wheel trailer. The roof is covered with solar panels, and we get to see what's happening, I think, in a lot of ways in North America firsthand. And there's an awful lot of fields of corn and soybeans out there, I tell you. It's really from sea to shining sea. It's GMO crops, monocultures, where nothing is allowed to grow. Any other plants are killed, any other animals are killed. There's just one thing is allowed to grow there, and it's to feed huge numbers of animals who are hyper-confined in stinking sheds and whose bodies are then stabbed and people eat them. Or they're fed to fish, who are then fed to other animals and then or eaten or something. I mean, they're fed to each other quite a bit. There's a whole thing, like this industrial meat grinder going on behind a curtain that people don't see. And how many of you in here have looked, raise your hand if you feel like you've looked behind the curtain and seen some of what's going on in our food system. That's great. How many people don't want to hear anything about this? A few of you probably, I'm sure. But I think it's profoundly liberating, actually, to understand our connection with food. That if we don't understand this, we don't really understand ourselves. Over the temple at Delphi, there was a saying, Gnathi Sutan, which means know thyself. And the idea behind that is that we will never, as human beings, attain wisdom or happiness if we don't understand ourselves. And I believe that we will not understand ourselves unless we understand our culture, the culture that we were born into. We come to this earth, we land somewhere in a sense. We are very profoundly affected by whatever culture we land in. And I think, like I remember when I was getting my PhD at Berkeley, I took a number of classes in education, philosophy, sociology, anthropology. One of the underlying ideas is that if you want to understand any culture, you need to understand their food. That food is really the primary way that any culture passes its norms and morals and values from one generation to the next. And if we, I think if we don't understand our culture, then we really don't understand ourselves. If you want to understand any culture well, you look at the food. So in our culture, I think we are in a profound state of denial as to what actually is going on in our food system, the effects that it has on a lot of stakeholders, I guess you could say, pardon the pun, but that's a popular word now, stakeholders. But I mean, people are affected by this. I mean, people who are hungry, like right now we're growing enough food on this planet, according to various experts in this field, to grow to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. And yet we have less than 7 billion people, and we have roughly 1 billion people who are starving because they cannot get enough to eat. They cannot pay for the grain that could feed them, or beans or something. And yet we have another roughly 1 billion people who are suffering the effects of eating animals who are fed this grain and soybeans, and suffering the effects of osteoporosis and diabetes and heart disease and cancer and obesity and all the things that come from this. So, like just in the United States alone, we're growing enough food to feed not only everyone in the United States, but everyone in China as well, if people ate a plant-based diet. So one of the messages inherent in this is that we live on a really abundant planet. We can feed everyone very easily. The problem is we're feeding people the dead bodies of animals, and so we're wasting enormous amounts of resources in doing that and creating enormous amounts of pollution. And this is covered over and not looked at. It's not part really of the discussion that's ongoing in the media, anywhere, even among progressive and liberal and so-called people. that I would think, I guess, that would be able to bring this up. That there's an enormous amount of inherent violence in our system to future generations, to ecosystems, to starving and hungry people, to animals, to people who have to do the work of killing these animals, to the people who eat the food themselves, to the children who are fed these foods and end up getting very early on getting diabetes and all kinds of diseases from them. So it's really very heartening to me to see that there are people who are willing to look at this, because I think it's difficult to look at. And in my own life, I remember actually never looking into food at all as a person growing up. I was born and raised in Concord, Massachusetts, and I remember when I was about 7 years old, I said to my mother, "Mom, is this the kind of food that, we were eating typically a lot of meat, dairy products, and eggs, and I guess what we call the standard American diet." And my mother said, I asked her, "Is this what everyone eats?" And she said, "You mean everyone in the world?" And I said, "Yeah, everyone in the world. They all eat like we do?" And she said, "Yeah, they all eat like we do." And then she came back and she said, "Well, there are vegetarians." And this was back in, probably the late 50s, and I remember the message I got from her, the way she said it was that you will never meet one. You'll never actually see a vegetarian. They are hypothetical people that exist, perhaps half-starved in India or China or somewhere. But where would they get their protein? They couldn't exist, really. And that was it. I never heard anything more about it. I never thought anything more about it. And I managed to go through my life and never see it or hear of vegetarianism again. And I remember going away to a summer camp in Vermont that was affiliated with this beautiful organic dairy. I was maybe 13 years old, and this was the kind of dairy that nothing bad could ever happen there. It's little rolling hills and very nice people, a few cows, chickens, and so forth. And but one day we were all told to go down and catch a chicken. I remember catching my chicken, and we had just made axes at this camp, and I learned how to use my axe and put the chicken through the hot bath after I cut her head off, and we ate the chickens. And I remember not questioning really what I was doing, that it was ever bad. I never thought it was a bad thing that we did, because got to realize by that time, say 13 years old, I'd gone through 13 years. How many meals is that? It's a lot of meals. And I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that chickens were put here by God for us to eat, that they don't have a soul, that they taste good, and that you must eat them or you will die of a protein deficiency. That's it. It's either them or us, and you better get them before they get us, or something like that. So and then a few months, actually it's about maybe three or 4 weeks later, we went down again to this to the dairy that was affiliated with this summer camp, and we gathered around a cow that we were told was no longer giving enough milk, and we proceeded to shoot this cow with a gun in the head, and it was very shocking to me to witness this, just because it was such a large animal who was so clearly, not wanting to be killed, and the amount of blood, literally, that just came pouring out when this happened. So, but I have to say, I still never thought that what we did was wrong. I knew it was the right thing to do. It was just really a shocking thing to see a living being reduced right in front of my eyes that way to just convulsing on the floor. So, and then actually, interestingly enough, the following year when I went to this back to this place, we tried doing it again. We did do it again. We did kill another cow. I think that the thing on dairies is they very quickly, when they're only usually 4 or 5 years old, their production starts to drop off. And even though they would normally live to be 25 years, you don't want to feed them if they're not giving maximum amount, because there's so many babies born on a dairy because they're constantly being impregnated every year. So they just replace them with a young one and they send off to slaughter. So the following year, it was interesting because we tried to bring this cow to a grassy place because the blood made such a mess on this floor, and she didn't want to go. And this is something I think we have to understand that I could see directly, was that basically animals have always resisted being killed. And in the World Peace Diet, I did some research on the history of this. And about 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, for the very first time in what is today the country of Iraq, people started to own animals for food, and we call it herding. And I think we don't realize that the animals resisted. They did not want to be confined. They did not want to have their babies taken away. They did not want to be impregnated against their will, manipulated, and all this. But so men had to learn over a long period of time, basically, how to do this. And so by the time I was, 8,000 or 10,000 years later, they were real good at it, And so what we did was we tried pulling her, and that didn't work. So we just got a chain, put it around her neck, and attached it to the back of a four-wheel drive pickup truck, and just pulled her, But what was so interesting was I was riding in the back of the truck, and we got almost up there, and she broke the chain. This cow was resisting so strongly, because I think these animals are more intuitive than we're aware of. I've had quite a few experiences myself. How many of you have ever had experiences with animals so you know they are intuitive? Some of you have. Yeah, it's really amazing. So I've seen some very interesting things. But anyway, she knew we were not going to do something she wanted to have any part of. And so I remember when she broke that chain, and I was in the back of the truck, and the truck lurched forward, and everybody fell down. I got up, and I saw this cow looking at us. And I remember feeling this feeling inside of me that I just wished that we could not do this. And I think this is a natural human feeling, typically, in this situation, that when you're trying to kill another being and they don't want to be killed. And yet I knew, in a sense, rationally, that she did have to be killed, because it's all about money. You're not going to feed an animal without getting some milk money back of some kind. So I went away. I remember eventually going away to college and started hearing about people who didn't eat animals, and eventually ended up going on a pilgrimage. I thought I'd try to get to California, and this was in 1975. I was really on my way. I went through this kind of a spiritual crisis, and I read a book called Cosmic Consciousness, where the author said that most people will attain what he called self-consciousness, but certain sort of superior, in a sense, people like Jesus and the Buddhas and others who had really worked on themselves had attained a higher level of consciousness, which he called cosmic consciousness. And he said it's the destiny of humanity eventually to attain this. And I remember thinking, okay, how do I attain cosmic consciousness? I know, I gotta go to California. That's where they have cosmic consciousness. So my brother and I headed off to California, and we got as far as Buffalo, New York. And after a few weeks, and eventually we worked our way south, because it was autumn and it was getting cold, and we ended up, believe it or not, at a place called The Farm in Tennessee, which in 1975 was almost 1,000 people. It was the largest, I guess, what you would call today hippie commune in the world at that time, and they were mostly people from the San Francisco Bay Area, actually from California, who had gone out to Tennessee, and they were eating a basically totally plant-based diet. So I had the direct experience of people not dying of a protein deficiency, right? I mean, they were totally healthy and strong, and kids, a lot of them were, no one used the word vegan then, but this was a place where no one ate any meat, dairy products, or eggs. And in fact, as we were being shown around the place, the fellow said to me, "I'm wearing vegetarian shoes." My mind was reeling from that. Yeah, we had vegetarian shoes here. They were vegetarians. They didn't eat, we would call them vegans today, I guess. But even the children, a lot of them were vegan from birth, and they were doing great. So that was it. I never ate meat again in my life. And I found out actually that Madeline, who was in Switzerland at the time, I hadn't met her, I didn't meet her for another probably, 15 or 20 years, also became a vegetarian exactly the same time.